The royal family returns to Netflix and brings with them some peak 90s nostalgia. I'm Chris Goodmakers, and I'm here to discuss real life versus The Crown. Season 5 has a lot to do with the Queen's age and her commitment to the throne. Prince Charles is waiting in the wings and getting a little upset that his mom is still sticking with the job. And they say boomers never retire. According to the first episode of the season, Charles went about persuading his mother by actively trying to usurp her with a secret meeting. He has a clandestine-ish meeting with then Prime Minister John Major, played by Crash Override himself. Charles pokes the Prime Minister about throwing his support behind the Queen's abdication. But when it doesn't go well, the whole meeting becomes more awkward than the time Jessie came over for dinner. So did Prince Charles actually ever meet with John Major like this? Well, no. It's another invention of the show. Charles and Diana were in Scotland at the time, and Majors himself has denied any such meeting. Prince Charles did have a similar meeting with the previous Prime Minister. I'll leave who up to your imagination, but it was Thatcher. Diana and Charles's marriage also comes to a dissolution in the 5th season. Part of the final catalyst was the exposé written by tabloid journalist Andrew Morton. Morton wrote and published the book, Diana, Her True Story, in 1993. It was a bestseller and was full of supposed inside information. Morton refused to release his sources until after Diana's death. He re-released the book with annotations citing Diana as the main source. He later backed up this claim with recordings of his session with the Princess of Wales. However, Diana didn't just agree to hand over the whole story to Morton. According to him, she first tested the journalist by dropping small stories that he could write about in the press. The break-in also has basis in fact. However, it was Morton's office that was burgled, and he was not the one to discover it. This revelation was enough for Diana to sweep her own home for listening devices. Gee, isn't family grand? 1992 was a bad year for the Queen, and has been dubbed Annus Horribilis. I'll tell you what's horribilis, my pronunciation of that word, am I right? Anyway, this was the reported worst year of Queen Elizabeth's life, and for that of the Crown. That year saw the divorces of 3 of her children, including Charles and Diana. The Windsor Castle fire was also a devastating event. Just as you see in the show, it was a massive blaze that took over 200 firefighters and 7 hours to put out. The damage was also substantial. The Queen did arrive to supervise the firefighting efforts. However, the shot of her and Philip amongst the rubble is pure fiction. Structural damage would have posed too much of a risk to allow an elderly couple to walk around in it. Watch out for that beam, Liz! After the fire, the price of restoration was on everyone's mind. It would cost millions of dollars of taxpayer money to fix. And there was a recession after all. Several decisions were made to ease the burden on the state. Areas of the castle were open to the public. The Queen also agreed that royal income would be taxed. A large running metaphor through the 5th season is the ostentatious but outdated HMY Britannia. The season opens on a surprise cameo from Claire Foy at the dedication of the new royal yacht. This massive vessel was in service to the Crown from its maiden voyage on April 14th, 1954, all the way to its decommissioning in December of 1997. Just like seen in the Netflix series, it was used to ferry the royal family and other international dignitaries. Also, like in the series, it was in dire need of repair by the time the 1990s rolled around. During its lifetime, the vessel had sailed more than 1 million nautical miles, and was a second home for the Queen and Prince Philip. Well, it was technically like a 15th home, but it was number 1 in Elizabeth and Philip's hearts. However, by the time 1990 rolled around, the pair of old fossils were also falling out of favor with the public. A recession and the election of Conservative Prime Minister John Major meant an era of austerity for the British public. Its decommission was announced in 1994. However, its final voyage wasn't until late 97. The vessel sailed out of Hong Kong after the handover from British rule. It was carrying Prince Charles and the last governor of Hong Kong, Charles Patton. At its decommissioning ceremony, the Queen was uncharacteristically emotional. There is some fact and some fiction in the events surrounding the ship's decommissioning. While it is true that the Queen spoke with Prime Minister John Major about the ship's failing state, It wasn't what the Netflix series makes it out to be. In the show, Elizabeth asks, and almost demands, that the tab be picked up by the British people. Major rebukes her with some facts about the public's current opinion and what he sees as frivolous spending. In real life, there was some concern from Major about the Britannia's repairs. However, they were expressed in a series of secret documents that were authored after the very public royal divorces. His government even did eventually approve the cost of repair to the royal yacht, but like all things in politics, this plan went out the window when Major was voted out and Tony Blair's Labour Party was voted in. The new government squashed the repairs, and that was it for the HMY Britannia. Now that I've mentioned it, another plot point this season was the British transfer of power of Hong Kong. Formerly under British rule, control was handed over to the Chinese government. The event marked the end of 156 years of British rule over the now former British colony, and was another sign of the receding British Empire. Control was set to be handed over on midnight July 1st, 1997, with Prince Charles in attendance of an official ceremony. Like in the show, he was ferried home by the Britannia in its last official voyage. The handover had been a point of contention in the media, and the royal family did what they could to ease the transition. We also almost got a James Bond movie out of the event, but it was scrapped for Die Another Day instead. I guess because we live in the best possible timeline. Young Elizabeth has a tumultuous relationship with Lithgow's Churchill. However, this is not the case in real life. In fact, Winston Churchill is one of the most fictionalized historical characters in this show. While the show portrays him as a certified grump who is quick to be irate, in real life, Winston Churchill was a far nicer man. He was remembered for being very jovial and outgoing. The Queen and Churchill famously had a cordial and friendly relationship. The first season uses Churchill as an antagonist to Elizabeth's station and power. This is one of the biggest fictions of the series. Of course, it's not the show's only falsehood. How about a character that the show invented out of whole cloth? Venita Scott is Churchill's personal secretary in the first season. During the first season episode, Act of God, the hot issue is the thick blanket of smog that is coating every inch of the London streets. It becomes so bad, it looks like a scene out of John Carpenter's The Fog. Winston Churchill was against the actions necessary to give London citizens a little breathing room. That is until his personal secretary is hit by a bus because no one can see 5 feet in front of their faces. Not only was this accident a work of fiction, Venita Scott never existed in the first place. Her accident was not the catalyst to change Winston Churchill's mind, it was mostly out of self-preservation. He was facing challenges to his political power at the time, though the event was not as much of a political event as it's shown to be in the show. There was no real panic or uncertainty. Many were even unaware of the dangers the smog presented until weeks later. It still makes for a compelling hour of television, though I wish it were actually more like John Carpenter's The Fog, and London had been attacked by seaweed-covered sailor zombies. There's some more artistic liberty taken in Season 5 with the relationship between Prince Philip and Penny Natchbull. We see him grow closer to his godson's wife over their shared pain and loss. At first, he seeks to console her by introducing her to the most elitist of sport, carriage racing. Wow, I can't even say the words carriage racing without feeling like it's costing me money somehow. After the passing of her daughter, Penny seeks solace in the friendship of the Queen's husband. However, it becomes something more between them. I hate to be the bearer of bad news on this one for all you Fenny shippers, but there was no evidence of this. Penny and Philip did have a close relationship, and the pair were seen together at races and events. There is absolutely no evidence it went beyond that, though. The hits just keep coming for Queen Elizabeth in Season 5. One further trouble for the monarch comes in the form of the infamous Panorama Interview. Diana is ready to spill it all in the form of a television interview. The show depicts her giving Queen Elizabeth a heads up about the interview and what she's going to say. This is some more historical fudging from the Crown. It's possible that the Queen was informed beforehand, however there is no evidence that this conversation ever took place. Given the frosty relationship between the two, it's not even known if they were on speaking terms at this point. While the Crown's historical accuracy is most seen in its recreation of places and public events, a lot of its inaccuracy lies in the private conversations the show depicts. This event is no different when it comes to the fictional interpretations the show makes. Season 5 brings us even more of the late Princess of Wales, played amazingly by the talented Elizabeth Debecki. She embodies Diana in an eerily accurate performance that had even experts praising her. Specifically, Season 5 follows the events leading up to and just after her divorce to Prince Charles. Always in the public eye, Diana had to use disguises to gain any semblance of privacy. As depicted, she would often go out in disguises that included wigs and makeup. One such evening saw her take on the town with Queen's Freddie Mercury. The public nature of their relationship was a huge strain on Charles and Diana. There was also the matter of Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. In the episode Couple 31, Charles and Diana finally make their divorce official. There's a scene of the two meeting at Kensington Palace after the final settlement. It's a hard conversation that's filled with awkward silences and regret. It's a brilliant scene that is unfortunately most likely pure fiction. Once again, there is no evidence of this meeting or its dramatic conclusion. Charles and Diana stayed pretty distant from each other after the divorce, though it's said they were amiable around their children. It's also unknown if Princess Diana's omelets were any good. The show is almost caught up to the present, which means there are more tough times ahead for the royal family. The series is quickly heading towards one of the most tragic events in British history and a defining moment for the royals. Elizabeth Debecki's performance has been a highlight of a series filled with terrific performances, and it will be sad to see her go. One of the primary catalysts for most of Season 5 is a poll on if the Queen should abdicate in favor of her son Charles. In the first episode of the season, Charles and his advisors discuss the results of a poll run by the Sunday Times. It asks the British populace what they think of the aging monarch and her almost 40-year reign. When it comes to Elizabeth, words like old, irrelevant, and past her prime come up a lot. When it comes to a much younger Prince of Wales, more favorable words like young, fresh, and exciting catch his attention. It's enough for him to arrange a secret, and as I said, fictional, meeting with Prime Minister John Major. It's also enough for the Queen's aides to desperately try to hide the poll from her during her Sunday breakfast. She's no fool though, and quickly demands a copy. It's a lot of commotion caused over something that never actually existed. There is no record of any actual poll run in the Sunday Times. There was sentiment around this time reflecting the results of the poll, but nothing so singular and concrete. The show uses this for more dramatic shorthand for something that was more of an ethereal feeling at the time. Episode 6 of Season 5 gives us a bit of a history lesson on the death and remains of the Romanov family. During the communist uprising, the Tsar and his family were taken prisoner by the revolutionary forces. Their 100-year-long regime was toppled by Lenin, Stalin, and the rest of the communist forces. However, their ultimate and grim fate came in mid-July 1918. Flash forward a few decades and the Iron Curtain has fallen, and Boris Yeltsin is now president of the new Russian Federation. He visited the royal family in an official visit, hoping to coax the monarch into her own official visit to the Russian capital. Part of this reciprocity involved the recovery of the Romanov family from their unmarked grave. The Romanovs shared blood ties with the British royal family. This was extremely important because in order to identify the remains, they needed blood from a living relative. That living relative happened to be the Queen's husband, Prince Philip. As shown in the show, this did in fact happen. Philip's blood was used to identify the remains, and the bodies were finally given a proper burial. While this is accurate, there is no evidence that it was the Queen herself who requested the remains be recovered. There is also no evidence that Yeltsin trash-talked the Queen within earshot of her and several aides. Though it's not hard to believe given that when Yeltsin visited America, he ended up running around DC in his underwear. That's not a joke, by the way. That actually happened. When it comes to historical accuracy, Netflix's The Crown is a mixed bag. While it goes to tremendous lengths to capture the look and feel of its setting, there is a lot that's dramatized. For 5 seasons now, the series has captured 40 years of history and the life of England's longest reigning monarch. Clothing, hairstyles, furniture, and other minor details are painstakingly recreated with care. However, whole characters and events are made up to drive a narrative point. It's hard to blame them for it though, when it makes for such good TV. Besides, what else am I gonna do? subscribe to HBO Max?